I'm just going to go through these definitions very quickly, and then you can discuss them in any one group. What's the difference between a LARP and a RPG? I would say that an RPG is an umbrella term. So if we have RPG here, role-playing game, any kind of role-playing game, would encompass tabletop role-playing games. It would encompass LARPs and other kinds of like the free form that is somewhere in between LARP and role-playing. So that's an umbrella term, so that's how they relate to each other. Quick definition.
I would say that in my personal experience, when people only say RPG, most people I've heard say that term really mean tabletop role-playing game.
Yes.
But I think that's specific for different areas and different regions in the world, how you use the word.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think so too, that it's mostly used for tabletop role-playing, but if you would actually look at it, it would be an umbrella term. What is bleed? You can talk about bleeding in and bleeding out, in and out of your character. If you bleed in, then you take something from yourself and put into your character. So, and you use that in your character. So the player bleeds into the character. If you're bleeding out, then the experiences of the character transfers to you as a player. For instance, after I had played Just a Little Lovin', I had played that I was had a relationship with a person for 3 days, going around holding hands, hugging, things like that. When the game stopped, I still had like residual feelings of where is that person I should be holding hands with. That is an example of bleeding out from your character. I knew that we did not at all have any relationship of that kind in the real world, but the residual feelings were still there. And it's not at all a dangerous thing, it's just, it passes after a little while. But just that thing that you're so used to holding hands, for instance, is an example of bleeding out. Do you have an example of bleeding in?
Yeah. Sometimes there's a term which we call close to home. And this is when you intentionally play things that kind of wake feelings from your real life. And you play someone who is very much like yourself. For instance, you could play, let's say we are playing a zombie game, all of us. And we could say that I'm going to play a doctor and you're going to play a priest. But we could also say that I'm going to play a 33-year-old game designer from Sweden in a zombie apocalypse. And now a lot of my life and who I think that I am will inform this game.
And of course, this can happen simultaneously. So if I've been bullied in school and I play someone who is bullied in the LARP, then I use my own experiences in the character, but it might also be very emotional so that the experiences of my character bleeds out back to me again. So it's like the bleed in, bleed out transaction.
And some people really want to avoid this when role-playing, and some people go into role-playing to do this. And the bleed culture is very big in the Nordic countries.
Can the role, I'm just going to go through last night as well, so that we feel that we didn't have a sense of loss. Can the role of the black box be explained more? Perhaps examples from yesterday. Think that the Meta Techniques workshop with Miriam is the best place for that. Will be thoroughly explained. As game master, did you find the game's narrative last night followed expectations? Well, it's hard to see like what expectations do we have on the game, because it's a very open game. It can involve in a lot of different directions, and every game is always different from the other game. Especially with this Viva la Revolution game, it turns out to be very different.
But I would say one expectation I had that was turned out to be true was that I expected this crowd to be much more interested in the philosophical and political aspects of the French Revolution than your average 14-year-old. So there was more discussion about philosophy and what does this mean and what is my role in the society on deeper than it would be with 14-year-olds, which isn't maybe a huge surprise to anyone.
Yeah, and I also had the expectation that playing the game for 3 hours, normally it's like 1.5 when we do it with 13 years old, would be no problem with grown-ups, because we have a lot of more knowledge about the French Revolution and being able to improvise around that for a longer time.
So didn't you also say, what, Miriam or Lars, that when you play with the school children, usually that they all want to get together and get, punish, overthrow, transport, that is something that generally
It's
happens.
what we discussed it in our group yesterday, and that is that I feel that in the game, when you play it with students or pupils, they have sort of a fearing relationship to Ford, and they find him to be unjust. That character to be unjust. But the difference is that they will probably not go through with overthrowing him, since there's such a power difference. Also, when there's a adult game master who plays the role of Truffaut. So that's
an
like
off-game difference in social hierarchy between us. The ending that we had now, I never had that ending in any of the runs. The last one before we go into group discussions. How much did the game masters control Viva la Révolution? That would actually be a philosophical question, because since we workshopped everything from the start, we controlled a huge amount, since we are workshopping your characters with you. But during the game, that's a whole different question. But if you look at the game being both workshop, game and debrief, then we control a lot of the experience. Example, what questions did we pose in the debrief very much shapes your memory of that game afterwards. Some things will be emphasized in the debrief, which will make you remember them more. So we shape the experience at a huge amount as game masters. But in the game, maybe not that much. Or maybe. Who knows? Right. So here's our 6 talking topics. And we're going to divide it so we talk about 20-25 minutes for like part 1, and then 20-25 minutes for part 2. And it's going to be 3 topics in each part. And in part 1, I'm going to write a number 1 here. We're going to have academic, and we're going to have characters, and we're going to have, I think, edu message LARPs. Is that good? And in part 2, we'll have LARP philosophy, game design, and war stories. And the way this is going to function is that we're going to have 3 tables. So 2 in here and 1 in the crash area. And we're going to assign you with one of these topics for each table. You can go to any which table you want to, and you can stay in the table for the whole duration of the 20-25 minutes. Or if after a while you feel that you don't have anything to contribute to the discussion, you can move on to another table. So at some table there might just be a couple of persons. At another table a lot of persons, and that might fluctuate during these 20-25 minutes. So, character, edu, message, LARP, and academic. I'm going to say that this is the academic table. This is the character table, and out in the crash area is the edu message LARP.
What's the subject? What's the world?
It differs. We have done this for years, but it's mostly sort of a fantasy adventurous game. But then you can see sort of the development, and the development goes fast. It goes like in 3 days. They go from this sort of like observing participant to someone being involved in the story. Some players do this development faster, and some do it slower. But sort of, I think it's a new kind of setting that you need to get into your head, that you can actually take control, or you can control the situations happening around you by playing the character in different kind of ways.
But I can believe very simple that if I'm a revolutionary, I know that what kind of weapons there are. So I can learn beforehand in the script or so. You have not an atomic bomb or you have something else.
Yeah, you can do that, but it's also what is the point of this game? And if the point of this game is to learn what kind of weapons were around in the 18th century, maybe you put focus on that. And this is always, when you design a game like this, you will have to make choices and you have to throw a lot of things out because there's a limited amount of facts that people can take in. And this is especially true for students who haven't chosen to be in the project, who are not volunteers. So you have to think about what's the focus here? What is it that we want them to get out of this? And it might be correct clothing, it might be that kind of historical fact, or it might be the concept of not living in a democracy. And in that case, you really have to work with the character of Truffaut and the soldiers, and to really get a true, that you get an oppressive feel, and people must learn how, and think about beforehand maybe, what would it be like if I didn't have rights, if I couldn't complain if the police do something wrong, that kind of thing. And if you want to put the focus on that, then you might lose a lot of it if you go too deep into costume. So there's a lot of, you have to choose what's important to you and what you want to focus on.
Actually, we did have a certain amount of knowledge beforehand, which was not in character, because we go to the inn, actually we know that there's going to be a group of dandies there, a group of royalists who are trying to disguise themselves as peasants. We knew all of that. Actually, in character, if we arrived at that inn, we're just seeing a load of people, basically, isn't it? So, but if we did that, we wouldn't have had the backstory.
Yeah, exactly, because I was kind of expecting somehow that it would all be, that I suppose that the game masters would be controlling it more, so that they would know all this stuff, but we wouldn't know it, that we would have to sort of find out, so it would be more like simulation in a way, because we wouldn't have that knowledge. We would be sort of living the characters firsthand, whereas, as you say, because we had all that knowledge, that player-character duality was very much to the foreground, wasn't it? Which is, I think, if you're experienced,
exactly.
Then that's.
In fact, if you play again, it isn't a matter of years of experience.
Yeah.
If you play again, it's immediately easier because you've had a chance to think about it. And as long as you're able to ever forget anything at all, and I'm very good at forgetting things, it becomes quite simple. I'm in character now. I've forgotten that I'm hot. I've forgotten that I'm in Scotland. I'm in an inn in the 18th century, and everything else is just not there until the break is called and it comes crashing back.
But how do you do that?
You just do. You just forget. It's how do you do it? How do you drive a car?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is you forget at a certain point.
I would say probably from background in improvisational drama, it's kind of really finding something inside to identify with, that then kind of feels really resonant with you. So kind of, well, whatever that might be. Some people might find it through an object, some people might find it through an idea, some people might find it through a bit of cautioning, but anything that then might help you just kind of boom, just kind of go in.
Because they're making their own characters, you can create a character which has got what they call story seeds, fabula, Eric Fatman's term, which is stories which are characters that are likely to generate a good story. If we make characters which have got a relationship triangle, and we just play it out, we'll probably get some kind of good story out of that. But it's also it's partly to then support the gamist style of play. We're not in the crude gamist American let's stab the monsters way, but in a more there's a strong gamist political social angle as well.
We're talking also about social message LARP and to a certain point political LARP. And for me personally, every LARP I design is super political, or every school LARP, because we have a curriculum in Sweden that says that we should encourage democracy, and everyone should be able to partake equally, and it's gender equality and all these things. And this is like an ideological agenda, which I think is wonderful. I think it's a very good ideological agenda, but it is political. But then you have I mean, it's how you define what is a political game. And just as you said, a game can be perfectly neutral in one setting, and if you move the setting, suddenly it is super controversial and almost a dangerous game to play.
One of my goals is to experience strong emotions from another viewpoint than my own.
Yeah.
And to be able to pack that much drama, I need information on where to find the drama. So for me, it's interesting to have the player character perspective, because then I know that if I want sort of like a strong smuggling drama, or I want like a relationship drama, maybe like my relative who is doing something behind my back on my boat, maybe I could use that to make a relationship drama, but it would take so much time for me to find that out without having the player knowledge about that.
In this game, it was a very long period before the game of research, where people would interview their grandparents, and they would interview old people in Belarus, and they would get everything like perfectly how it was made. So they learned to cook traditional food, and they had real clothing from that time, and they lived in a village. And of course, this was an adult game. And a group of adults can decide to do this together and do a lot of research, and of course they learned a lot about life in Belarus this way, and in the Second World War. But they didn't so much learn these things during the actual game. They did it in research to make the game feel real, and of course to learn. So a LARP project is an excellent, as I said before, an excellent frame for learning facts, but the game itself is risky, because you don't know what you're learning is truth. This might just be an interesting story that you're learning.
Miriam, what's your take on these things about storytelling in LARP?
Well, it depends, I would say. I don't have a clear, like, it's not like this and it's not like that, because I find it very interesting, very different how you design it, and how many people you have in your game, and how what kind of target audience you have for your game.
In USA, you will have to have special insurances for everyone attending at an event, and then you will have to have a company for it. Then you will have to make it commercial, and that, interestingly enough, also structures the way the LARP are organized. Because if you want it commercially, then you want people to pay all the times. So then you want to play campaigns running every weekend, things like that. And you also want people invested in the character. So in some US campaigns, if you get experience points for attending a LARP, but if you missed out, you can pay a certain sum to get that experience point retroactively. And then we're talking about a completely different tradition, a more commercial tradition.
I think we're moving away from the subject of LARP philosophy here and into game design for profit. And I would just like to say at the end there that thinking from the game designer's perspective, I would say that, for instance, it is very difficult to actually be able to run a company where you design original games for every customer, because that is crazy expensive in terms of how much time it takes. But it is definitely, this is a conversation that is ongoing, and people are in different places right now trying to figure out how can we do this in a good way? Like how can we use this in training? That's definitely
that's
something.
my question.
More people than you are thinking about it, and I don't think anyone has one definite answer, especially as almost everyone doing LARP design comes from a different LARP tradition, especially those who have gone so far as to be professional, because there are so few of us who can do this for a living, that there's like just a few of us in Sweden, just a few of us in Denmark, and some Brits, I think, and especially
the big
if you see,
festivals,
like, events.
Does the commercial tradition make a difference to the nature of the experience? And in those situations, yes, but does it actually affect how the game plays out?
Can I point out one thing, which is, from my reading of it, quite a lot of Nordic governments have grants available, quite substantial grants, for the creation and the running of games. So to say that it's non-commercial, I think almost obfuscates the fact that the government are
It's
saying
still funded.
here's 50k. It's being
Okay.
funded by the government rather than by the players. So it does,
Well, the players pay their taxes to the government, so they are still.
So does this definition of Nordic LARP being non-commercial mean not for profit,
Yes, I think so.
as
And
opposed to not something that you contribute financially towards the running of as a participant?
Yeah, I think not for profit. And there are like two different traditions. One where you apply for grants and make these LARPs, and others because we also have in a way that's also grants, but we also have these non. For instance, if I'm very interested in rifling, I could start a rifling club, and then I could get grants to my rifling club. And the same thing happens here with role-playing clubs. So that way you can also get funding. But since a lot of players have all their gear already, very often you can set up a LARP and just take £10 for the LARP, because all you need is a woods and everyone bring their own tents. So that's like the third way of it being uncommercial.
We have more of a tradition of what we started calling Discovery LARP, because knowing the whole story and knowing everything up front does curtail your ability to be surprised. But I think there's a balance in terms of designing something like this. If we had not 3 hours, but as long as it took, and if it didn't matter if we were still here at 4 a.m., then you don't need to impose that 3-act structure on it. Actually, the 3-act structure is very good. You have a bit to find out who your character is. The concept of rising tension, it encourages people to ramp it up. The third act could just as easily have been bring it to a conclusion by any means necessary. But actually, the third act, we would have struggled because there were 3 or possibly 4 even more potential endings, and there would have been off-game conflict between them, and again only half an hour to bring it to an end, and that might not have led to a satisfactory conclusion.